Hey, and welcome to Better Conversations Live. I'm Sehaam Cyrene, and my co-host is Ben Miller today. Better Conversations Live is all about giving us the words, the language, maybe the attitude as well, for having better conversations. And today we've got John Cockburn-Evans, our guest today. He's going to be talking about toxic cultures, which is going to be rather enjoyable, isn't it, Ben?
Certainly is. Yeah, thanks, Ian. Hi, everyone. Looking forward to chatting with John in a moment. But yeah, just a quick reminder, the Better Conversations live is every Tuesday, 1 p.m. UK time. If you're watching the next hour live, just add your questions into the chat. And if you're watching the recording on catch up, yeah, continue the conversation and discussion below for sure.
Yeah, brilliant. So, Ben, I shared with you an article that a lovely friend sent to me this morning. I thought I wondered what thoughts you had about it. I thought it was kind of interesting. Let me just pull it up so folks can see. So I just want to say a quick thank you to Gabrielle Hayes who dropped this into my WhatsApp this morning. Did you have a chance to have a look at it?
Yeah, I did. Quite a few things sprung to mind actually, but yeah. So the premise is, well, the article is how to make small talk big, and the premise is we've as human beings we've forgotten the ability to talk with one another, and so yeah, we're kind of social creatures, and we got to where we are today by working alongside with each other and understanding each other, and building rapport, building relationships, collaborating, and everything else. And so yeah, I think with anything in life, the less you do something, the less practice you do at something, no matter how good you might have been one day, you become less good at it. So yeah, maybe my thought was we need to kind of carve open some space for conversation and free up time, I think, for that.
Yeah. Yeah, I liked it because I think it's true. There was another article I read recently, which was about the fact that we've been languishing. That's
Mm,
why, it's not that maybe we're overwhelmed with what we do, but there just isn't the sort of energy. And I think it's the same with our conversations, the small talk. If it was awkward before, it feels like it's probably gotten a little bit more awkward. And also, you don't know what difficulty people have had, right? You don't know what losses they've had.
mm,
So it's become, even small talk's become a little bit maybe of a difficult space
mm.
to navigate. So yeah, it was interesting article. And anyone's keen on that one, it's in the New York Times. It's the opinion piece by Anna Sale. And she talks to coaches, therapists, and so on to get different perspectives on that. And there was something in there that I found kind of interesting, that conversations, you're not necessarily going to get closure in a conversation. These are short, maybe interactions with people. So there was a sense for me about compassion, right? And we've got to be gentle with each other, I guess, as we socialize again. Interesting.
Yeah, and I think that I think we need to perhaps get better at asking questions, at listening, at maybe not rushing to judge people, and yeah, I think that we're kind of in this slightly weird space where we've had lots of it feels like lots of small talk, but lots of small talk via WhatsApp or other channels, and it's not the same, is it? And so I feel from my personal experiences that small talk is great, but I've really wanted to maybe swap some of the WhatsApp conversations with just a few minutes chatting and hanging out in the real world with real people. So it's just trying to find that balance, really, isn't it? And we're all
Right,
different.
right. Well, and something I think in your forthcoming course, Ben, is this thing about the pace of things is so fast that we don't necessarily have time to think about the consequences or the impact of maybe something we do or say or fire off, especially in WhatsApp. Things can move quite fast. I am grateful sometimes for that delete for all function in there, because that's we're moving at quite a pace. So interesting. Well, there we go. Just food for thought there. We are going to bring John on in a moment, but I did want to just highlight to folks the Leaders Who Coach course. The cohort one, there is a self-paced one, but there is a cohort one that I'm starting on the 18th of May. It takes 4 months. So if you're looking at upskilling your leadership skills, your conversations, you want to be more influential, you want your team to listen to you, you want to be able to think about what the passions are of your team and how that might be beneficial to both growing the individuals in your team as well as expanding what your team or organization can do, then do take a look at it. So you can get to it via betterconversations.co. You can't miss it. And you can also get to it by leaderswhocoach.today. Do check it out. There are only 15 spots. It's quite an intimate cohort, which from all the feedback I've had is kind of almost the deal breaker. You do a lot of self-learning, but then we come together and do the group discussions and case studies and exploration there. So do bear that in mind. And also in terms of the staying in touch with us and knowing when we're live, just wanted to point this one out. You can follow Ben on LinkedIn. You'll find him here. So if you are interested in being his guest, please do drop him a line, connect with him there, and likewise with myself. But the same goes for all the hosts on Better Conversations. You'll find us. And if you're connected, then you'll know when we're live. So cool. Let me bring on John then. Ben, you're going to stick around. We're going to bring you back in a little later to get your reflections on the conversation that John and I are going to have. And I know you've got lots of questions and thoughts around that already, around toxic culture. Let me welcome John. Hi, John.
Hi there, Ben. Hi there, Sehaam.
Hey, John. Nice to see you.
Good to have you here. I'll just do a quick intro of John. He's a waste hunter, author, coach, and transformation expert. He's got tons of experience, 30 years operational experience in chemical engineering and manufacturing at giants like BASF. Is that how I say it, John?
Yep.
Yes. You're always cautious on that.
Or BASF, as some people would call it, but I don't think
okay. Cool. And DuPont. And you've worked, what I'm fascinated by is some of the environments that you've worked in. We're not going to reveal identities here, but we are going to talk about some of the difficult aspects there. So, Ben, I'm just going to jump you off and bring you back in a little later. John, do you want to give a bit more of an intro, tell folks a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So I spent 20 odd years in operations and then the 10 years in corporate consulting. And thanks. Obviously, I'm not going to diverge client names, but to be clear, it's not the companies that you mentioned that were the toxic cultures. It was some of the other areas that I was in, because I think that's very important. So, I moved out of engineering into consultancy. And that was my opportunity to coaching. We met through the coaching network, etc., and both share sort of coaching qualifications, which is great. I've been lucky enough to work all over the world in different roles and guises and everything else, mainly with consulting clients. And as you can imagine, different areas do have different cultures, which can be defined either by the region, it can be defined by the company, and it could be even defined by the department or the particular operating unit. What really struck me, which was as part of some of the training that I'd done and some of the work I'd done, was Geert Hofstadter's 6 cultural dimensions. I'm not going to mention them all now. They're well mentioned in the literature, and you can go and find those online. But it is really, really powerful how these dimensions can shape the culture. Oh yeah, thank you very much indeed. There is a chapter specifically on toxic cultures.
Yes.
In chapter 6, and I'm going to refer to some of the context, not necessarily the book, but some of the key differences that you might see. But with Geertz's 6 dimensions, you know, just a few of them are masculinity versus femininity, for instance, power distance, individualism, right, long-term orientation, and indulgence, right. You can imagine that all those things will have a big, big impact on company culture or departmental culture. So I find that quite powerful. It's not so much that the tool will give you the answers, and this is the key thing about any consultancy knowledge transfer or coaching. And I know you'll know it from your experience, Sehaam. It's the tools and the approaches don't necessarily give you the answers. What they do is start you on the journey, and they trigger conversations, which is what we're talking about today, and dialogues. And really, really important, and something I blogged about recently, was understanding context and perspective. And funnily enough, I was chatting to a PhD neuroscientist actually on a webinar, community practice, the other week, and we were just both saying how important context and perspective is, even more so during COVID right now. And quite often it's the bit that gets lost, but because we become transactional. We live in a linear world, and I know that Ben's passionate about circularity versus linearity and complexity, and some of the people may have read Peter Senge and people like Margaret Heffernan as well to talk about that. But context and perspective is so, so important. So yeah, that's really just a flavor of really the backdrop to some of the work that I've been doing, you know, and working, I guess. And the interesting thing is from shop floor level, and I mean literally operators, you know, out in the field in large chemical plants, up to sea level as well. And that's important to be able to flex between the two.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. Yes, I did mean to do my intro with telling people about your book, which just come out. And you've got a brilliant chapter in there, John, about toxic cultures, which and there's a few things there that I want to ask you about. But maybe a good place to start is, how would we define a toxic culture? What makes a culture toxic?
I think there's a number of elements. You know, you could define this so many different ways, but I always look at, to a certain extent, input, process, output, right? So if you think about this, is that we all want to do well, right? We're all trying to do our best. So you could have a parallel there, which says that's the input. We're all working, we're trying to do the right things and everything else, right? The output is the results, right? Now, the output is determined by the process. Now, I would argue or postulate that toxic culture is an atmosphere that doesn't allow the correct processes to happen in simplistic terms, and to get the right outputs, right? And there will be degrees of toxicity, of course. You know, there'll be mild toxicity in terms of, you know, just poor behavior or misunderstandings or maybe low-level communication. But in the worst case, and of course it shapes behaviors, it shapes attitudes, mindsets and behaviors, right? Sometimes it's the stuff we don't see as well. You might be familiar with the famous Edward T. Hall iceberg model, but the important thing is that toxicity prevents the correct outcomes. And that's the way I look at it. And it's a way of actually depersonalizing it, Sehaam, and rationalizing it when you're explaining to people. And there are a number of attributes to that toxicity. Some of them are obvious and are well talked about at the moment because some of them are deeply personal. Some of them are not so obvious. And that's the ones I sort of cover a bit in the chapter and some of the papers I've written, because I've seen it firsthand and experienced it. And I wanted to get that message out there, because I think a lot of people will be experiencing it. They might feel it internally, but they may not overtly see it. And of course, that's partly under the passive aggression guise rather than the sort of formal physical aggression guise. And that's really important, because anything that affects somebody's poor performance, whether it be an individual or a team performance negatively, can't be good. It's not good for the individuals, it's not good for the team, and it's not good for the business.
No. Well, it definitely isn't. And you touched on a lot of things there. One of them is, you know, when you find yourself in that sort of environment, the toxicity causes you to adjust your behavior based on what you understand has value in the room at that time. That's not necessarily saying that value is useful or productive or whatever, but that's what people are trading on in the conversations. I'm going to listen to you because you seem to be dominating, rather than listening maybe to other voices. There's can you talk a little bit about compliance and what causes us to either acquiesce or fall silent or sort of just go with it instead of maybe voicing a different opinion?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, the more oppressive, and I'll use the word oppressive rather than toxic, the more likely we are that we're going to feel the need to be compliant to whatever that is, because nobody really wants, we're pack animals at the end of the day. Nobody wants to feel to be on the outside. You know, some people do, not everybody, right?
Yeah.
But that's the interesting paradigm here, because the people who are able to make a difference and try and transform that culture, and I've seen it and I've been part of that, have to actually sit out of it sometimes. They have to walk away from the culture. And one of the things I've talked about is sometimes you're going to be 180 degrees different to the culture in order to make a difference, because the danger is, and it's the same with new team members when they come in, if that culture is really strong and there's the sense of belonging, and then new team members come in and they feel duty bound, you know, to acquiesce to that culture, which is not supportive. And the more people get involved, the worse it gets, right? The stronger the, shall we say, the negative culture becomes, and the less likely they are to break out. And that it takes a really strong leader, you know, or coach leader to make a difference. And they have to be able to look from the outside and see what's going on. You know, I've worked in environments where I honestly thought I was going back 40 years. And I think that the paradigm shift we have to is there is an assumption, I think, over the last 10 or 15 years, Sehaam, we know, there has been a move to more discussions around emotional intelligence and all the positive aspects, you know, rather than transaction. So I think there's almost like a de facto assumption that that's what it is now, right? That is not the case, right? You know, we witness it every day and we see it every day. If anything, you could argue it's got worse, actually. And I've been shocked in some of the environments that I've gone to work in, where I thought, as I say, I'm going back 40 years. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. And unfortunately, you know, like any other coaches, right, or leaders, you know, with that coaching skill, you're able to see it. You're able to step back, look in the helicopter and get out of the weeds. Because that's the other problem is if you get in there, it's very difficult to see what's going on. And it takes other people coming from the outside. And that's why you'll see famous leaders, you know, and influencers, you know, making a difference, because they are able to look from the outside and say, whoa, you know, what's going on here? What's actually going on here? You know, and some of the extreme, and I'll cover those a bit later on when you ask some questions, but some of the extreme, shall I say, facets of that I'll describe, because they may not be obvious always to the listener.
Well, could you share some of them now? Because I think it'd be interesting.
Certainly. So, you know, most people can see physical aggression, right? People, you know, even verbal abuse, you know, people shouting and trying to control that way and trying to dominate the room. But there's a lot more traits that would fall, in my view, fall under the passive toxicity, right? Simple things like, for example, not communicating via official channels, which I've seen before. In other words, contacting people by text. Now, you may think that's quite innocent, but it's not. Because if there's no audit trail, that individual who is, shall we say, being oppressed, bullied, maybe a strong word, or whatever, coerced, whichever word you want to do it, has less chance of recourse to solve that problem because there's no audit trail, right? And I've seen that done before, where nobody would leave an audit trail. There was no email, there was no documents, you know, and to me, it's always a bad sign. When you see a culture where people are, and I mean, obviously you don't want to go into writing on everything, but they're afraid to go into writing, that's almost like a negative KPI in terms of what's really going on.
Yes,
you know,
but it's not getting captured.
because it's not getting captured.
Yeah,
and
right.
They can now get away with it. It's, to a certain extent, that's what criminals do, isn't it? You know, and scammers and cyber attackers and all that sort of stuff. But there are other things as well, you know, like inconsistent HR policy within an organization. And that might sound odd, but, you know, in any large organization, people are looking for fairness, aren't they? They're looking for parity in the way that they get treated. And it follows, you know, a system that's transparent, right? So it's authentic. But a lack of transparency in that in itself can cause a problem, because then it's like, are there favorites? You know, there may be not. And that in itself can become stressful. So there are all sorts of other things on there. I think the other thing I've seen, and this might sound a bit counterintuitive, but what I would call a high emphasis on compliance at all costs. And what I mean by that is I don't mean compliance with safety procedures. So that's very important. I've worked in organizations that are excellent in that. I mean compliance in terms of what the hierarchy say. So in other words, it doesn't matter the value you bring, right? It's more a question of you do what I say or else, right? And that's what I mean by a high emphasis on compliance. And that can be extremely damaging. You know, I've witnessed very, very senior people, very highly educated people in those sort of cultures physically shaking, right? And being stressed to the point that it wasn't just uncomfortable for them, it was uncomfortable for the other people in the room, right? And the compliance there means what the boss says. And that sort of ties in a bit about, you know, maybe the poor HR policy, right? Because obviously then there's no recourse again, there's no framework, you know, similar, poor reward and recognition, asymmetric, asymmetric reward and recognition, right? It's like that, you know, where some people get it and other people don't, you know.
And that happens in meetings too, right, John? I mean, you know, in team meetings where someone may be pressing their point of view, and you end up with the team, everyone else feeling really uncomfortable about the conversation that's unfolding in front of them, and feeling that they have to take sides, feeling that they, and if it's their boss who is, let's say, under attack, perhaps not the most eloquent word, but you know, if they're witnessing that, it really changes the dynamics within the team, between teams, in terms of what people feel they can contribute or say in the meeting, what's going to be, to your point, what's going to be rewarded, not just in terms of, you know, promotional benefit, but also in terms of, I'm going to listen to you because you've got a valuable point of view, or I'm not going to listen to you because, hey, you don't toe the line when I, you know, get up and say something, you don't back me or whatever. So that kind of a reward isn't happening.
Yeah, and this is where it takes experienced people in the room to call it out. And when I mean experience, I don't necessarily mean in terms of years or service in an organization. People who are mature, you know, have the most maturity, you know, whether they be coach leaders or people from the outside or whatever, to call it out. And I've seen it done before. You know, I've done it myself, right? I've seen other people do it where they just are not comfortable, and they just come and say, look, I am not comfortable with the level of hostility in this room, and I don't think it's productive. And of course, you know, that may gauge a reaction from the people who are delivering it. It probably will. If in fact, actually, if it delivers a reaction, that's a good thing, because it means hopefully they are listening. But the point is, it's done it in a depersonalized way. So you're not having to go at the individual. You can say, you know, I do not feel comfortable with the level of hostility in this room, and I don't think it's being productive. And I've seen other people do that, and all of a sudden that, you know, can, if it's done appropriately, have a calming influence. And then there's hopefully a pause reset button from the protagonists, if that makes sense to you.
Well, it must come as a relief. And I love that statement that you said. I think that's a really helpful one, because you don't often know what to say in that environment. You do want to say something, which brings me to something that you said in your book, John, which is you're talking about, you know, if you're a new leader joining an organization, you don't want to alienate yourself. Neither do you want to acquiesce to the sort of culture that you've stepped into. And you recommend being not being too much of an initial maverick. So that's someone coming into an organization and actually feeling it. And I guess that's when you're going to feel it the most, is when you do join either a team or an organization, that sort of, you know, your expectations of a productive, harmonious team, and you land in the first meeting is kind of, you know, loggerheads. So why is it important to not be too overt about your position?
I think that's there's a number of reasons, and that's a really great question. I think the first thing is you've got to be in it to win it, right? If you're going to go in there and you've been hired for whatever reason to make a difference and change the culture, not necessarily directly, but indirectly. And it might be a question of, you don't go in intending to change the culture, but you realize that the current culture, you know, in the unit or department you're in, is not going to serve the outcome, right? Is that you need to sit back and observe, almost check, hypothesis test, because of course you could be wrong, right? I'm not saying that you are. The chances are 9 times out of 10 people's intuition is pretty good, but you need to observe. And it's like walking a tightrope, and I've experienced this, whereby you, on the one hand, you don't want to be seen to be acquiescing to the culture, because the danger is the perception of you is that you're part of the problem or will become part of the problem rather than against it. But you don't want to go in, I would say, guns a blazing, because that can backfire. Because, you know, as a new starter, of course, there's probationary periods, there's all sorts going on, is you could be taken out. So I think you have to be very careful. And I think this is where sitting back and using all the coaching skills, right, of sort of absorbing the atmosphere, feeling it, and processing it, maybe outside the room or outside or in the evening, when you think, well, what are you going to do, right? That's perfectly okay, because nobody's going to expect you to go in, you know, with a sledgehammer from day one anyway, right? And be very measured in your approach and start to do things a bit differently. I know in one experience I did, I mean, the first thing I did immediately, and I thought, well, this is going to be non-controversial because nobody's going to complain. So, yeah, and again, it's not acquiescing. I instigated coaching culture. So we started, the first thing we do, although there was no formal coaching culture in that area, we're going to do it. I'm going to coach people, you know, at least everybody in the team, at least once a week. And by the way, if it doesn't happen, that's my failure and not yours. And this is actually where and this is one of the reasons why I love the productivity work that I do in consultancy with the coaching work, because there's a huge overlap in the Venn diagram here. And this is where the visual management approach that comes from top manufacturing companies, right? And in fact, by the way, you'll find that the top manufacturing companies, right, the ones with the highest performance, generally have a very, very strong training and a very, very strong coaching culture in there, right? And that goes back to the days of Toyota and some of the learnings that they kindly shared with us. It's the visual management piece. And the first thing I did was I put a whiteboard on my door, a little whiteboard, put a schedule on there, you know, and if the coaching session happened on time, there was a green tick. If it didn't, it was a red cross, but that was a red cross against me and not them. And it's those little things, it's those visual signs that people start seeing and think, well, hang on, this may be not all bad, right? This may be a bit different, right? And that's not getting into the machinations of what people do. And I think the other thing also, which a lot of people talk about, is that you know, let them be experts. If they know what they do, create an environment or a culture for them to do the work, right? In other words, you're not going in there to substitute to do the work. You're there to coach, guide, and direct as is necessary, right? And also, don't overstep the mark. Pull back if you need to, you know?
Well, absolutely. All sound advice there, John, in terms of, you know, leading the way. I think just to go back to something that you initially said was observation. Just when you're stepping into any role, really, any new job, any new role, is doing that observation, because you could, and one of the things I encourage people to do, as I'm sure you do, is find out exactly what's expected of you. Because the interview may not be it entirely. And you may have been given charge of a program or a project that is a hot potato. And you thinking that you're there to deliver the change. That's why they hired me, because I have, you know, shown success in delivering projects on time or whatever it is. It's really important to have multiple conversations, right? Not just with your boss, but with people around, different stakeholders, to find out exactly what the dynamics are, what the real, you know, issues are, what's been tried, and just, take your time. There's nothing to rush for, right? You've got to build
absolutely not. And it's interesting. You mentioned that the team as well as the boss. So I would always start with the boss. If your intuition, and it's normally right, feels as though maybe what you're being told on paper is the transactional part of the project, but there's an agenda that's not fully out there, it's incumbent on you as the individual to go and ask those questions and have those difficult conversations, which are, right, you know, what's really wanted here? This is my read on the situation, I think, right? If I'm wrong, please tell me I'm wrong. But if I'm not, please, you know, reinforce that with me. And how am I going to get measured? I'm not just measured on the transactional work. How are you going to measure me culturally, right? And if you're not sure yet, let's just agree a simple outcome, and then let's develop a process to get to that outcome and be clear on the process. And you almost need to do the same and be very, very honest with your team as well, you know, without doing any, having any professional indiscretions, because you can't always tell them everything. That's the other thing, of course, is again, you just be clever with your words and clever with your language. Say, look, I'm here to support the team. I'm here to help it grow. This is what I'm seeing. And, without being trite, my door is always open and all that sort of stuff. But, if you've got a problem, come and talk to me. But also be very clear is there may be areas that you'll stray into which I can't help with, right? And be very clear on the things that you can't help with as well as the things that you can. Because, we always talk about trust and authenticity in coaching, which is very important. But I think expectation management is very, very clear. So, you've got to be managing upwards, you've got to be managing sideways, and you've got to be managing downwards,
Well, contracting, isn't it? It's contracting and being really clear, not making assumptions and thinking, oh, that must be what they mean, but actually getting more of a definition, asking for examples, those sorts of things. So as a leader, let's say I'm a leader of a team. The team works great. I have a great relationship with my team. But externally, trying to collaborate with a different division, what advice would you give the leader in either protecting your own team or creating some air cover? What might you suggest?
Yeah, that sort of things
difficult.
Happens all the time, particularly in large organizations or multifunctional organizations. I think that this is where you as a leader have to accept the fact that you're going to have to absorb a lot, right? Because part of the protection process for your team is probably not oversharing, right? And the last thing you start out, if there's some tensions, for argument's sake, between, say, you or the objective of your team versus what they want in the other division, right? Initially, you're going to have to suck that up as a leader. That's your role, right? Because the last thing what you want to do is, yes, you want to be transparent, authentic, but you don't want to translate negativity initially down to your team, because that not only could it rub off on them, but then you could create a tension between the two teams or the two departments, which may not exist, right? So you've got to be really careful, and one of the things that I've always done as a leader in any area, there's this old balance point between delegation and abdication, isn't it? You've got to delegate a project, but you mustn't abdicate. And whenever I've been involved in a very tough project, whether it be consulting delivery or whether it be an operational project, I always overmanage the first phase. So the first phase is I always make sure I'm seen, I'm walking about, management by walking about. I probably do more work than I would normally, but not in a way that takes the work away from the other people or discredits their capability. And that's a really important thing here. The most important thing is it's not just about what work you do, it's making sure that they still feel valued for their expert input. So I tend to overmanage it. And all that is role modeling behavior. So when we start off with a new team, that they know I'm prepared to do what the Americans would say is the hard yards and put the work in, right? And then once you feel that it's working well, you've created that dynamic, right? Then you can just ease off, because it's a lot easier to ease off than it is to dive in, right? So I'm a great believer in role modeling behavior. And a lot of the work I do around the world involves role modeling behavior. And that means in certain cases, taking people out of their offices and getting them onto the shop floor, whether they like it or not, and having those private, difficult conversations with them one-on-one and say, look, if you really want to be a true leader, you need to be seen out there, not hiding behind your desk. And I've seen loads of people, who feel very much more comfortable behind a computer. And they've got to learn these days, particularly the digital world, that actually it's better to be seen. I mean, people call it management by walking about, and it's very important.
Well, it definitely is. There's a lot of modeling that I think you have to do as a leader, and you are being watched, right? You're being observed by your team, by others. And I think you make a good point. There's no point introducing friction when none exists. Having an open dialogue with your team, even just to express what you're trying to achieve, can actually, because we do assume a lot. We observe people and we go, oh, that's how they do it. Or you leave things unsaid, or you may place a position, but your position may change. But did you go back and actually clarify that with an individual, or did you leave them with a certain impression? And so I think that plays a lot, doesn't it, into persisting with that sort of a toxic culture, that allowing things to not be clarified, if you can phrase things that way. But
Well, yes,
you
no,
know, just that you where you're trying to create clarity, making sure as a leader that you do work really hard at that and over communicate and articulate. Yeah.
I was reflecting on that last point, Sehaam, actually, about making sure I answer your question fully. So at the moment, I talked about protecting, to a certain extent, your personal team from potential friction from the other side. But obviously, it could be a two-way street. So you've got to think about it the other way. And that's where, actually, in some respects, if you can build a strong bond with the leader, because that's what your role is, it's top up, bottom down, etc. Sorry, top down, bottom up, rather. That's really important. And this is where, arguably, ideally, those difficult conversations should happen, off camera between you and them, right? So that it's resolved before they go back to their team or you go back to your team. And so, you both leaders have a role as a filter. And if it gets to a point where, it looks as though it's irreconcilable at that level for whatever reason, then you're going to have that very difficult conversation and say, look, this isn't serving us, this behavior or this approach or whatever, what we're going to do about it. And you just say, well, what we're going to do about it? Look, we're both challenged with making this work, right? Are we going to sort it out, or are we going to have to go up the line? And it's always that transparency all the time. It's that openness that's absolutely critical, but openness in a way that confronts the issue rather than the individual. And one of the things that I spend a lot of time talking about in a lot of the workshops I do is the difference between conflict and confrontation. And it may sound trite, but a lot of people, you and I have discussed it before, Sehaam, don't fully understand the difference. And it's absolutely critical. You do not want to create conflict, because conflict is between individuals, teams, and departments. What you want to do is confront issues. And if you have that mindset and you have it in the back of your mind that you're confronting an issue, then you will avoid conflict. You'll be able to do the difficult, challenging stuff that needs to be done, but without having personal conflict, because that just depersonalizes everything. And it may be, a difficult HR interview with an employee, around performance, or salary or whatever. Confront the issue, not the person.
Absolutely. And provide the valid explanations, right? Provide a point of view, but also allowing that individual to respond, and allowing them, again, not inflaming things by taking their first response as their final response. We're all processing stuff, and if we can't do that safely, if we can't explore that with you, we kind of go off half baked, right? We don't really have a good awareness of ourselves around that. How there's a big thing, isn't there? You mentioned it at the very beginning about, what causes us to acquiesce or comply in an environment where we're really not very comfortable. There's something that you said in your book, which is about getting that balance between being liked or respected. Which one is most important in a situation like this?
I would say, without doubt, is being respected, right? I mean, I don't think we go out to be liked. To me, liked is almost like a consequence of being respected. So if you're respected, there's a good chance you'll be liked. But if you try and go out with the intention of just to be liked, then you may not be respected. Or you might be liked by a few people because you're just serving their needs, but you're not being respected by the group, because, there's plenty of people out there who go for likes, but they're not very authentic and they're not very transparent and stuff, because they may be trying to manipulate a situation. So I think in that area, we definitely go for the respect first, right? And the liking will come along. You think about these days as a school child, right? Who were the teachers that you enjoyed the most? Not necessarily the ones that you liked the most, but the ones that you respected. And I know in my experience, and having spoke to, my siblings and other people, it was the ones that you respected, and you respected them because they were open, tough, fair, transparent, and honest with everybody. And that was the key thing. That's where the likability factor comes from. It comes from respect, if that makes sense here.
Yeah, definitely. Well, but we feel that, don't we? When we start a new job or new role, we do desperately want to be liked for, and to make those connections quickly with people so that we can have that influence. But you're right, that's nothing good is earned in a heartbeat. We actually have to work at those relationships and consistency, right? Showing up
Oh,
consistently.
absolutely. Consistency is everything. If you're not consistent, people will pick up on it immediately, and then the respect will go. And I think, we talk about sustainability all the time, don't we? We talk about physical sustainability. We talk about sustainability of relations and business and everything else, right?
Yeah.
You have to do the hard yards for it to be sustainable, which means earn the respect. As they say,
absolutely.
Respect is not something that happens overnight. It's something that's earned by the way that we act and the way that we show ourselves and the way that we're perceived to work and everything else. Yeah. So, there's no substitute for hard work, and it doesn't matter whether it's doing mathematical equations or whether it's building relationships.
Absolutely. Now, I couldn't agree with you more. I've just brought Ben on to get some of your reflections, Ben, from that conversation with John. What was coming up for you?
Many things. It's usually the case when I speak to John. I haven't read his book, but I feel like maybe I've had the audio version in various chapters through our conversations over the years, John. So lots of great nuggets in there. Confronting the issue. I really like that towards the end, and but I perhaps want to go back to one of the earlier pieces, which is the six cultural dimensions. And I just wanted to get your thoughts really on how a leader should try and look at these different dimensions, because we typically try and overcorrect and go from one extreme to the other. But is there a case for rather than thinking about either or, so individuals or the collective, that we really need to just try and find both and approaches and try and find the kind of balance? And I suppose probably there's a little bit of context which you mentioned about earlier on as well to throw into the mix. But I just wondered, we don't want to throw the water out with the bath
baby with the bathwater.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, that's the one. I can never remember them. But so kind of hierarchies as an example. Not all hierarchies are bad. So maybe you can riff off that.
Yeah, and that comes into the power distance dimension in Hofstede's work. And remember, there are 6 dimensions, and that's deliberate because that's what provides the full perspective and context. So the danger is that you might find one that's more predominant than the other. The danger is if you look at one on its own, that won't give you the perspective and context. So if you take, for instance, individualism versus collectivity, right? There is a sort of slight interrelation between that and masculinity and femininity. It's not that they're all mutually exclusive, right? The way that he's categorized them, and he's done it extremely well, is that helps. Remember, it's like any approach. It triggers a dialogue. It is not there to solve the absolute problem, right? So if you look at indulgent cultures versus non-indulgent cultures or long-term orientation, there's a link there, right? So building that perspective is so important. And if you're not sure, go on to Hofstede's website and have a look at it. You can pay for the assessments if you want it to be done professionally, but I think you're allowed 1 or 2 free, sort of low detail, attempts at actually doing these elements on cultures. And I think you can choose up to 3 countries. I'll put an example in the book, but, it's really powerful because it gives you a very quick visual representation. And I would argue anybody going, to work abroad, for instance, right, because it's done by region, right, it's going to just do a quick analysis, especially if you're a new manager. Let's say you're going to work in China, for instance. You've never been to China in your life before and you want to observe the culture. Just do a very simple assessment to start with. Just get a feel for it. But the trick here, and I think this is what you're saying, Ben, to come back to your point, is it's like any data. It's just information, right? It gives you a clue and a trigger for a dialogue. Do not, and this is my strong advice to anybody, do not overinterpret it, right? Because that's when we get into an area of cognitive bias, which again is something that a lot of people are talking about. I mean, I was lucky enough to read Tim Harford's book this year, Making the World Add Up. And one of the things he puts in the book, which to me really resonates, is that in the old days of pure science, people used to have a hypothesis and they'd go out and go and get data, and they would test to see if that data met the hypothesis, which was fine. And if it didn't, then they'd readjust the hypothesis. what Tim's saying in this quick fire world, and he's got some really good examples around that, particularly, and something you and I have talked about before, then big data, for instance, and AI, is that actually the danger is this, in this quick fire world we live in, this sort of instant answer, instant gratification that we need, is that what we do is, instead of adjusting the hypothesis, we go and try and find other data that supports our hypothesis, because we get so vested in the hypothesis, we then go and keep finding data, which is not the true sort of independent scientific approach, which again is extremely dangerous when you think about it. And that in itself is a cognitive bias, right? Yeah. You know, whenever we look, you know, and Daniel Kahneman talks about these, whenever we take that, you know, we follow that route, you know, and we're all guilty of it to a certain extent, so I know I am too, is it, you know, it's very dangerous. And that's why I think the mantra of checking in and checking out is so important. You know, it doesn't matter, you know, any relationship, any team building is, you know, you do something, you check it, you validate it, you hypothesis test, and you withdraw. And then you go back to it, and then you try something else and you withdraw. And this constant checking in, checking out process, which we do, as you know, in coaching, Sehaam, is really powerful, because that's what makes us stay on the true path, and we don't get mission creep or scope creep, you know?
Well, I think there's an over-reliance, isn't there, John, on data. Data is useful up to a certain point, but it's not nuanced. And at the end of the day, what works or how things get fixed is on the strength of our relationships. So, you know, the more that we're willing to be in conversation with people and clarify things, and be willing to listen and learn from the other person, even if they're saying something we don't agree with, I think that does wonders for organizations and cultures, because you are basically embedding within the culture an ability to converse about difficult topics, rather than defaulting to, and often at great delay, some sort of audit or process that says, you know, actually the problem sits over here, when, you know, it's interesting but not necessarily helpful to the team or to that leader either. Just conscious of time, wanted to jump in. Mag, I had a question in the chat for you, which is, when we think of diversity, equity and inclusion, there are probably lots of toxicity examples that the majority doesn't even see. So as a minority or someone different within the organization, how do we make sure that the environment is evolving and taking in all voices, and not just the voices of those who formed the culture in the first place? So to your point about someone joining.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And I think, again, I've got a very simplistic model in the book, but is the thing with diversity and inclusion is so important. That's something that Ben and I have talked about at great length, is diversity of thought. You know, traditionally it was very much about diversity of gender, understandably, and background, race, ethnicity, and all that sort of stuff, and even sexual orientation. Is that this diversity of thought piece is very, very important, because that's the one that's less obvious, right? You know, people think, and Ben knows more about this than I do, in different ways and have different approaches depending on the way that the synapses are wired in the brain. But in terms of, to answer Mag's question, in terms of making sure it's right, I think, again, if we see that as a leader, yes, we're part of the overall organizational culture, but we're also a micro leader for the area that we're in the influence, is we set the standard by role modeling behavior, right? So if you start in any team onboarding, and the first thing you do with any project is you onboard the team, right? And the onboarding the team should be just as much about culture and diversity and inclusion as it should be on how we're going to work together and how often we're going to report and how we're going to communicate and what's the quality of the reports and the PowerPoints we're going to do and stuff. That open discussion, right? You know, we're all here as a team. We're going to work better. And there's, without doubt, the most diverse teams I've worked in have been way, way, way the most productive. So this whole concept of, you know, when you've got diverse individuals in a team, that the envelope is bigger than the sum of the parts is absolutely true. But you have to create that environment. And that basically means you have to have that trust and authenticity. And the leader should set that at the start. So, right, we're going to talk about diversity and inclusion, right? We're going to have this thing. And, simple example in consulting. I mean, it sounds silly, but it's funny. I was talking to my daughter about it the other day. One of the first things I ever do when I'm leading a book is, are you a morning person or an evening person? And people go, what do you mean? Because if you're working across time boundaries, which we are now in the global village, right, it's really important to know whether you perform better in the morning or the evening. You know, I have to perform better in the morning. You know, I'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning after a good night's sleep to go and work because that's my most productive time. But I've worked alongside people who hate getting up early in the morning, won't get up until 9 o'clock and stuff. And they'll work through the night until past midnight, you know, which is not me. So actually, when you balance
absolutely, finding out how your people learn and operate best is definitely there. And those are not general things, right? It's like, thank goodness we're starting to shift away from benefits that fit every, you know, one size fits all, but actually thinking more about individuals. But I wondered, Ben, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that I think this is just an ongoing process, and I think that I think what you said earlier on, John, about consistency being key, and you know, and combining with openness. You know, if there is just this curiosity of leaders to kind of just welcome and embrace difference in all of its different, you know, shapes and sizes into the conversation, into the culture, then I think that is important. I think that's beneficial, you know, with all different types of diversity. But you're right, John. I think that in some ways that we've kind of gone from you know, focusing on different organs, you know, in our evolution, and I think in some ways we've arrived at the brain, and the kind of brain mediates literally everything which we do, and we still have no idea how it works in some respects. You know, we can't explain a lot of things. So in some ways, it's the final frontier of scientific discovery, you know, so some scientists claim. So we should all be curious about how each other thinks and sees the world and understands how they interact with it, and just literally be curious, you know, create space to ask questions and, you know, not rush to conclusions. So I think we all kind of just need to kind of create that space to explore. I certainly don't have all of the answers as to how we go about that, but you know, if we can just all go on this journey together and create that space, I think that's important.
Yeah, I think the curiosity piece, Ben, just really has to be followed with respect. I think the curiosity piece is very important, and that is the initiator. But you've also got to respect that diversity, and I mean truly respect it, meaning, and that's respecting people's time. And that's the one thing I'd say, everybody, if you're working in a complex team and you're working under stress, and sometimes you will be, respect somebody's time. And what respect somebody's time isn't just about morning and evening. It's like, I'm not going to waste your time. So in other words, if I'm going to send a piece of information on to you and stuff like that, I'm going to make sure it's good enough that you can take it and use it without having to recycle it, right? So, you know, just a very simple example, I've seen people before you get a PowerPoint template or something like that, and they're perfectly capable of doing it. And they'll say, don't worry, I'll just give you my notes. Well, what do you think? You know, all of a sudden I've become your PA, right? Because you're too lazy to go and put your notes into a format. Now, if you can't do that format and you don't understand, fine, I'll help you. I'll work it out. But please make sure you pass that information on so you're not wasting the other person's time. And that's one of the things, you know, I joke about being a waste hunter, physical waste and process. But
it's true, isn't it?
It's not wasting other people's time.
It's true. And it comes back, it's reciprocated, right? If you take the care to you know, look after people's time. We're at that point, John, where we are, kind of the time flies, but I'm about to give over the screen to you to talk about your phrase of the week. And as well as sharing that phrase, if you could take sort of 30 seconds to just educate us on why that particular phrase is important, we would love to know. So we're just going to jump sideways. Let me get this set up for you, and then I'll give you 60 seconds to take us through that. Okay.
Thank you, Sehaam. So yes, this week's phrase of the week is controlled confrontation. I alluded to some of the differences between conflict and confrontation through the dialogue we've just had. And what do I mean by controlled confrontation? What I mean is that you confront issues, because if you're not confronting things, you're not moving forward. And, you know, we always have to move forward. It's the old adage, if you don't move forward, you're standing still, right? Or if you're standing still, you're moving backwards, right? But the important piece is the control. And the control confrontation is this bit about checking in and checking out, being respectful. So if I'm going to confront somebody over something, right, I do it in a very, very respectful way. And that's where the control is. So it's not just about confronting, and it certainly isn't about controlling, but controlled confrontation. So I would advocate to anybody who's facing a very difficult situation, just have this in the back of your mind. Think about controlled confrontation. If you're facing something difficult, be prepared to confront it, but do it in the right way. Plan it, think it, and control it. And yes, in some kind, you can show your passion, but don't necessarily let your emotions run away with you, because that might be backfired. So that's my phrase of the week: controlled confrontation. Thank you.
Brilliant. I love that. Very nice. Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
Really, really good. Well, it's at this point I just want to say thanks, John, for coming on.
Pleasure.
We can always have a long chat. I'm sure this won't be the last of our chats here on Better Conversations Live. Just a reminder to everyone that Tuesdays are the days to tune in for us. Tuesdays, 1:00 UK time, and the times in different time zones are here. Ben, you've got a guest we've spoken to before. Do you want to share who's coming on next week?
Yeah, so we've got Drew Tarvin next Tuesday, the 11th of May, same time. So he's the world's first declared humour engineer. He runs Humour That Works, and his passion, his thing is really helping leaders use and leverage humour to be more productive, but also reduce stress, improve relationships, build connections. It really has quite a few different uses. So I'll be exploring humour in a bit more depth with Drew next week.
Brilliant. Yes. Yeah, that will be interesting. We'll have a look forward to that one. And you can find us on YouTube. There's a recording of this. It'll be on YouTube. It's also on betterconversations.live. You'll find us there. You can follow us on Facebook as well, Twitter, wherever you fancy, wherever it happens to be your platform. We try to be there. Thank you, everyone. We are going to, I think that wraps it up, right? Ben, I think we've covered all things. We're going to wrap up with just a reminder about leaders who coach, for those of you who are interested. But thanks again, John. Really lovely chatting to you today. And thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. It's been good fun.
Great to see you, John.
Brilliant.
Cheers. And you.
See you in the real world soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. All right. Take care.
Beer in Cambridge, my friend.
Yes.
All right. Take it easy.
See you Tuesday next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Feel invisible at work, talked over? Would you give more if your boss listened to you more? Would leading the team be more rewarding if your direct reports actually did what you asked? How about those important strategic decisions? Do you wish your peers would involve you much sooner? Leaders who coach feel calmer, more confident, and definitely more influential. And you can start feeling that way too in just 4 months. I'm Sehaam Cyrene. I'm an executive coach, and I teach leaders how to show up stronger with integrity and with an inclusive and empowering mindset. Leaders Who Coach is a CPD certified online course that I've designed and delivered to C-suite leaders, VPs, directors, senior managers, and founders. You'll learn to hold important conversations, surfacing what's really going on while helping your people grow. You'll learn to express your different opinion in ways that keep others listening. And you'll learn to motivate your direct reports with less effort and more accountability. It's time to design your style of leadership. Enroll now at leaderswhocoach.today.